Happy Earth Month and welcome to Season 5, Episode 4. It seems like it's going by so fast, of The Green Agenda. Thank you first and foremost, y'all know how we do, to our sponsors, the Environmental Defense Fund and the Climate Action Campaign for helping to make this work possible. On tonight's episode, I'm super excited. We're joined by a new guest. Y'all know we always keep our guests strong for you, so this is going to be a great experience. But we will focus tonight on environmental justice and the criminal justice system. This conversation will explore the connections between environmental justice and criminal justice, again, including how pollution and environmental degradation can lead to increased policing and incarceration in Black communities. Tonight, we are joined by Amber Sherman, who I've had the honor and the privilege of chatting with a bit tonight, and am excited to have more conversation while we're on. She is the lead Tennessee regional organizer for Black Voters Matter. Yes. Anything they should know about you before we get started?
I'm from Memphis, which is the most important fact.
Yes, that's they gotta know.
Yeah, lifelong Memphian. And yeah, like you said, I'm the lead organizer for Black Voters Matter in Tennessee. So I do some work outside of Memphis, but most of the stuff I'm doing is mostly in Memphis.
Okay. Well, we're going to go ahead and get right into it, y'all. We have a great show ahead of us. So I am from Genesee County, big ups to my hometown. I live right outside the city of Flint, and as many of you all know, because we've spoken about it several times before, am an advocate for the city of Flint, which is home of the Flint water crisis, the home of many great things beyond the Flint water crisis, but is also the site where that public health crisis occurred. And so I know firsthand the dangers of lead poisoning. Lead poisoning can cause severe mental health issues, among many other challenges, some of which, it'll take us decades to really understand the full implications of. And for example, some of the implications and the long-term fallout it can have is Freddie Gray and Corinne Gaines, who both experienced lead poisoning and then later went on to be murdered by Baltimore police. Mm-hmm. The murder of Freddie Gray led to the Baltimore uprising of unrest in 2015. So, Amber, getting us started, how should law enforcement and the judicial system work to acknowledge and address the often overlooked connection between environmental racism, lead poisoning, and systemic injustice as seen in those tragic cases with Corinne Gaines and Freddie Gray?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I really think the judicial system itself should be approaching community members from a public health lens. So more so asking what services can we provide you with, not what can we charge you with. And I think that they always are approaching something from a very defense state of we have to make sure that we get this person off the streets, or they're just so dangerous, and never asking what services does that person need, or how can we help them. Mm-hmm. And so I would really love to see that first, approaching folks from a race and trauma informed lens that puts public health in the forefront versus putting how many bodies I can lock up in jail.
Yes. And I think, when we talk about the history of policing, right, mm-hmm. We are seeing these systems function according to the foundation that was set for them, right? That, policing began as an extension of maintaining slavery, right? Trying to catch mm-hmm. Runaway enslaved folks. And so now today we continue to see, that system functioning primarily in a way that disservices Black and brown communities, those that are frequently categorized as the criminal. And it doesn't, not only does it not acknowledge and recognize mental health, public health, mm-hmm. but it also doesn't de-escalate. We rarely see police officers getting necessary training to be prepared for de-escalation tactics. Yeah. And we frequently these days, in conversations or interviews that happen after a circumstance of police brutality or violence happens, we hear officers saying, well, I was afraid, I feared for my life. Well, I didn't know. And so
I think people should stop doing jobs they're afraid to do. We should stop signing up for just stuff that we're afraid.
Because, you know, the reality of the position, but it's also the implicit biases of, would you be experiencing this same fear with a white body?
Yeah.
With a white body. Like, would you have these same concerns or make these same assumptions about the probability of danger if you were, you know, and I think there's so much that goes behind that and what could happen in training, right? Like, and I think, you know, that in the season, the cultural environment that we're existing in right now, as it relates to just government and policing and all of these things, I don't necessarily think it's at the forefront of conversation, but I think it's something that we have to continue to be intentional about and thinking about how we can adjust approaches.
Yeah, I definitely don't think it's at the forefront. And I think just considering all of that, like the actual systemic injustices, but also the impact of lead poisoning, their first, you know, course of action should be care, not cops. Yeah. And that's a really popular campaign we have in Memphis about care, not cops, because we do want people to actually have care for the issues they're dealing with. We don't just want to, you know, institutionalize everyone and put them in jail.
Yes. What do you think are alternatives? Like, if you could offer forward-facing advice to police officers on, you know, this is my 1, 2, 3 crash course, right? This is your training course, Amber's training course on policing, right? Outside of just, obviously there's so much in the system that just needs to be torn apart, right? But if you, what advice or approaches to care would you offer?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the police need to step aside completely. We don't actually need police to provide care. I would love to see people receive services from a social worker, a licensed clinical, you know, healthcare worker, a firefighter, a paramedic, someone who actually offers health services, not someone who only has a gun and handcuffs.
Yeah, so people who actually have a background in preparation to de-escalation tactics, and folks that have certain understandings to identify, because that's also sometimes the gap is sometimes there is a misrepresentation or a misunderstanding of the way that mental health issues show up in marginalized communities, right? Like in the way that they are characterized or received, right? That like we've heard people talk about, or I've had conversations where people talk about like Black women in the workforce, like the angry Black woman trope, which sometimes is just Black women experiencing anxiety, or being assertive, or the pressures of the job. Sometimes even like depression in Black women manifests or looks a different way. Anger, it's received as anger when really these are. So a part of it is having people who are trained to identify, one, what their implicit biases are and what they're bringing to the space, but also being able to, in a high pressure situation, being able to identify like this person is experiencing bipolarism, right? Or this person is like this. There are external factors that are contributing to this situation beyond just, what the circumstances presenting as. Okay, so moving along from there, abandoned and dilapidated buildings known as blight, for those who are unfamiliar, are a persistent problem in many predominantly Black neighborhoods and marginalized communities struggling with systemic disinvestment, white flight, etc. How do you see blight operating as an environmental justice issue that exacerbates crime, violence, and other challenges facing these communities? That's part one. Okay. Part two is, and feel free to have me repeat it, right? Because there are always big questions. What policy solutions or community-driven approaches can help address blight in a way that promotes public health, safety, and overall community well-being?
I definitely think blight is a huge problem in Memphis, and I think just the the appearance of blight just gives off a we don't care about our community vibe, and I think that's why you tend to have increased violence, because when people feel like no one cares about them, then they don't treat their community back. So if I feel like my community doesn't care about me, I'm not going to care about my community. And that relays in how I treat people, that relays in like the upkeep of the community, like all of that stuff is factoring in together, and it also relates to how I advocate for my community. So instead of going to a city council meeting and telling them to fix these potholes, I'm just throwing trash out the window like everybody else. And so when people see that people care about them, they do act differently.
Yeah.
And that's such a long time of like being neglected really tends to seep into your brain. It's very psychological of like, you know, we're just throwaways.
Like learned helplessness.
Yeah. Like just feeling like a throwaway, and that makes, you know, your community feel the same way. So I think that blight itself is horrible just because of the psychological effects. Like when I drive through a blighted neighborhood, I'm like, dang, these people don't care about nothing. But also like the if the home has lead in it, like all that rotting wood, lead, other stuff, like that's going into the air. And so those people are still also like having those same health issues, and it's just lingering around. So I think one, the fact that they have to deal with blight is ridiculous, but two, not having a plan that isn't criminalizing is a big issue as well. And I think that when we look at some of the programs we have in Memphis that I like are like kind of adopt the block programs where like community members clean up their own communities. There's an organizer in Memphis, Keishan Franklin, who has like a unity campaign where he brings in like different gang affiliated people, different community members, and they're all adopting different areas and doing community cleanups like every month because they want people to know that like we as the community, you know, we care about where we live and we're going to clean it up.
Yeah, that's good. And then I appreciate that you recognized when blight exists in neighborhoods, there are things that are just attached to having empty abandoned buildings in a neighborhood, right? Like you can't be upset that homeless people are setting up in empty abandoned buildings when one, you're not addressing homelessness, and two, you're not addressing blight, right? Like, and these are things, or even like, you know, crime is associated with these things because you leave these empty spaces, open lots available for crime to occur. Like, you know, and we know, we literally have data that says that these two things are correlated together, right? And not only that, but recognizing that directly by addressing these issues. Now, the struggle sometimes being, how do we, because on the opposite end of that, we have blight, abandoned buildings, but then empty lots are also a really big struggle. Like, right, so once these buildings have been demolished and torn down, then we go through other neighborhoods where you may not have as much blight, but you have abandoned lots, just like lot after lot of concrete, or so. What are some examples, and I know there are several great examples in community of how we can not only address blight, but also on the opposite end of that, because we say tear down the building, but then what do we do? Yeah,
that's actually a big issue in Memphis that the community, I feel like, really tussles back and forth with the city council on, because we'll have a lot of empty lots, and then the city council will say, okay, we're going to approve this planning and zoning application, putting to build something here, but then the community doesn't want it. And then there's this pushback of like, well, this has been vacant for, so long. Someone wants to buy it and use the property, but the community doesn't want it there. And so then they're pushing back. Our city council is pushing back and saying, well, we have to do something. And that's happened a few times. We've recently had issue where there was like a nonprofit wanting to build a biomass campus in the North Memphis neighborhood.
What's a biomass campus?
I don't think they could explain it.
Oh, okay.
I don't think they could explain it themselves.
Real.
But basically they were like destroying certain materials there and like chopping trees and like burning stuff. It was a lot happening. But they wanted to put it in an area where there was like literally a neighborhood on the same street. And our city council is arguing back and forth like, well, they're, going to fix these issues, and this lot has been empty for such a long time, but the community is saying we don't want a sawmill and a biomass waste facility like near our homes. Like we have a right to say that.
Exactly.
And so there was all this pushback, and our city council, I think, was very close to approving it because of that same issue of we have all these empty lots. And then they're like, well, what do you want us to do with it? Because, we don't want to to keep this empty.
Yeah.
And they're like, give it to us. And they said like they had a neighborhood association. Neighborhood association's like, well, we've presented plans to y'all before about wanting to use it for a garden or wanting to use it for a park, but like no one has responded to us. So I do think a lot of it is the city council themselves, as like representing the city, don't want there to be all these empty lots. And then also they're not necessarily listening to the community and what they want, and they don't communicate enough with them when they have plans and ideas to actually follow through on it. Which also becomes a whole thing. So I think it's mostly an issue on the city council side, to be honest, and also that the communities don't have the support they need to like get things that they want. But I have seen like our Official Bill in Memphis chapter in Memphis, we have a community garden that we use an empty lot to like turn into a garden. There's other neighborhoods in North Memphis who have turned empty lots into gardens and other stuff and doing like farm to table. And it's also a really good way, I think, to curb violence, because sometimes people just need something to do. So if I teach you how to plant and then show you how to come here every day and trim these, flowers off and like how to harvest, that gives you something to do. And curbs the stupid stuff you might have thought about doing.
Right. We had a guest a couple episodes ago, Sterling, who came and he worked in the urban planning sector, and he was talking about community land banks and talking about how important it is for a community to have autonomy, because realistically there's a tension that we face in communities that have been historically disinvested, right? That they reach a point where there's such a struggle in infrastructure, there's struggles in economy, there's struggles with blight, there's environmental issues that come alongside that, and so many of these issues are overlapping, but then there's a tension of wanting to do something with the land, but also wanting whatever is done with the land to be a reflection of the desires of the community, right? Because I think he joked on that episode about, like the trifecta, that there's like a yoga studio, there's a smoothie place, and there's all of these things that have a direct, that show direct signs in community of oncoming gentrification. And so it's being intentional within local municipalities about the inclusion of community engagement and consensus in the process of deciding what. So yes, demolition is important, right? It is important to get rid of blight. And in some of those places, it may be important to rebuild new homes and housing structures, because that's also a major issue.
Homes. I feel
right?
Like we don't have enough of those.
Yes. So the point being, though, that there are so many different options. There are so many different options that community can participate in that will be beneficial, and not only addressing disparities and gaps and correlations to crime and violence, right? But also counteracting them by creating community spaces and creating a sense of autonomy in community. Because even that, a part of learned helplessness is having the feeling that no matter what I do, that nothing is going to change, that this is just the way that things are. It's the disillusionment, right? That, maybe grandma participated and tried, maybe mom participated, maybe I tried, maybe dad tried, maybe auntie, uncle, but nothing's going anywhere. And at what point, right, do I give up, right? So I think also in working to address blight and empty, deserted lots, finding ways for community to participate also supports to fill gaps and holes in the continuum of care.
I think autonomy is the perfect word, because one thing that I talk about a lot is like, the fact that we live in a very surveilled state. And that there's always this idea of like, we need to surveil people because they can't, do the right thing by themselves. You have to be controlled by some mechanism. So that means I have to put up these cameras in your neighborhood, or you have to have a security guard at every store, and they have to walk around
every school,
you got to go through metal detectors. Like, this idea that you have to be controlled to act how society wants you to act does really take away your autonomy. And I think that when I've seen people be in places where they feel free enough to make decisions for themselves, they make good decisions.
And they feel pride in their community, right? Like, even that, like, one of the impacts of the Flint water crisis, and there was it was never, I will say, in my experience, it wasn't that there was a lack of pride, because like the Flintstones will tell you, they 10 toes down, baby. Flint ain't never lost pride in their city, but it was the lack of autonomy with the implementation of the emergency manager, right? They took away not their pride and not the concern and the care, because they had been saying for quite some time that something, but it was the fact that they did not have, they were not able to operate within the power that they had to be able to actually impact change as quickly as it should have been, because it shouldn't have taken as long as it did, right? And so in the wake of the crisis, there has had to be a reclamation of their power and their autonomy and their right to, and then there are so many struggles, right, in the infrastructure, right? Like you talked about city council, right? You talked about there are so many bureaucratic barriers in local communities, and some of them are that much more. Now bureaucracy is always going to be bureaucracy. Okay, that's the same no matter where you are. The paperworks and the redlining and like that's always going to be a thing. But specifically in marginalized communities, the barriers that exist to being able to get simple things done, right? To make simple progress is a struggle, and we see it all over the country. We see it all over the country. We experience it in Flint. You just talked about the experiences that y'all are having in Memphis. Like that's such a big struggle.
I think tension is a great way to describe it. When you were talking about the relationship, I was like, yeah, that's the word I want to use, tension. There's a very thick tension in the air. And I just want to say, I agree about the barriers issue, which is mainly what I work on in Memphis. I just got our city council to agree to free parking on the days that we have the city council meetings, because I know that that's a huge barrier for people and was a barrier for me. And so I encourage people all the time, like, if you're trying to get more involved and there's a barrier, bring it up. Say something. Because I sent lots of emails. I was making a big deal about it. And then they was like, okay, yeah, we should do that.
And sometimes you just got to drum up a fuss.
Sometimes you got to ask. They say a lot of times people never even ask them to. I also asked them to move the meeting time back so that working class people could come to the meetings, to move it to 4 p.m. instead of 3 o'clock in the middle of the day. And they did. Yeah. And a lot of people can show up now. So a lot of times it's just like saying something. Don't suffer in silence. Yeah. Like, bring it up.
I was literally just talking to somebody earlier today about like not letting suffering be my story, which because I think it's so easy in communities that experience oppression and have historically the generational traumas that come alongside that, right?
Used to, like, suffering.
So used to just suffering being the how you doing? Yeah, I work hard and I work. There's a scene from Hidden Figures. I remember. Girl, there's a scene where she goes, and I work like a dog day, and I
said, couldn't be me,
girl.
I said, you do what?
But that is so frequently the story, right? That like I'm struggling at work, I'm struggling in community. The struggle love story, right? Like there's so much, like, struggle becomes the expectation, like that is the baseline that and it is right? And so you, like, to your point, a part of it is being willing to circumvent that and overcome that, to say, like, no, like, struggle doesn't have to be my story. That there are some things that are beyond my control. There are some things that I myself that I may not see come to fruition in my generation, right? There are those things that I may have to struggle against, things that are struggling with me, right? Because everything, I'm not struggling with, some things are struggling with me, okay? But you have to be very intentional about continuing to speak up and making yourself available for the solution, right? That's good, yes. So as climate change drives more frequent and intense heat waves, research has shown that extreme heat disproportionately impacts Black communities. This is a subject we've previously discussed on the show, due to long-standing patterns of redlining, disinvestment, and environmental racism. These environmental injustices can exacerbate existing social and economic stressors, potentially contributing to increased rates of crime and and violence. Again, that tension, right? These overlapping public health crises. So how do you see the impacts of extreme heat as both a public health crisis and a threat to community safety in marginalized neighborhoods?
I really love this question because I'm always looking for a reason to talk about the urban heat island effect, and people in Memphis don't know about it as much. So I'm always looking for an end to discuss it.
There you go. Here,
this is my end. Yeah. So in Memphis and other major cities, the extreme heat is a huge problem, and because we have so much concrete and less trees, it always feels a lot hotter than it actually is. It feels usually 15 to 20 degrees hotter than it normally is, and it also lowers life expectancy because it's so much hotter because we don't have trees blocking and giving us shade. Then people, their bodies are actually affected by that, and because we have such poor air quality, that also lays into it. So it's a huge public health crisis. That's a major issue, and I keep telling folks, let's stop building condos and office buildings and build some parks because we need the trees. We need the urban canopy. That's important. And when it's really hot outside, people are less likely to have good critical thinking skills. We have a lot of apartments in Memphis, or not as many people in homes. And so if you all on top of people and it's hot outside and you're angry,
I'm not my best self when I'm hot.
Yeah, the extreme heat really does have a real effect on people. And usually in the summertime, the peak summer, and the winter when people are home for the holidays and stuff, is when we have increased domestic violence and crimes because people are have a short fuse. And if you, Lord behold, you experience lead poisoning, so now you really are struggling with your cognitive thinking and critical thinking skills and being able to discern situations. You're just quicker to snap. And so the extreme heat has a huge impact on that and on violence because even now in Memphis or in Tennessee, they passed new laws to make the hold time longer for certain crimes. So if there was a domestic violence case, you already had a 12-hour hold, but if it's aggravated assault or other charges, now there's a 12-hour hold with that too. So your life could be completely disrupted because you was yelling at somebody, and they hadn't called the police and said they feel threatened for their life. Yeah, and it's all because it's freaking hot outside. Yeah, we have been having record heat breaking numbers. Yes. For the last 10 plus years. Every year is a breaking record. I was how many records we gonna break? Every year we done broke a record for the last 5 years. I'm concerned. But I think that's I really would love to see more resources put towards actually showing people how to resolve conflict. I actually designed a race and trauma-informed conflict resolution training a few years ago that talked a lot about this. How do we talk through difficult conversations when you're in extreme situations like extreme heat or the holidays or at a protest? How do you work through that and not end up in violence? Yeah. And it was really helpful for a lot of people because they were yeah, I just don't have these skills. We start arguing and it's on 10.
It's up every time. And that is such, conflict resolution is such a, it's such a lost art. I would not say lost because I still have hope, but it's definitely on the verge of extinction, okay? Folks are struggling. We were talking about this just before the show. In our current climate, folks are struggling deeply to be able to offer basic decency to one another. Folks are really struggling to be able to maintain regular conversation. Yes, the patience is thin.
Once you say something they don't like, it's over.
It's over on all sides.
We can't even have a conversation.
Yes, that. And so conflict resolution is so incredibly important, and especially in communities that are experiencing disproportionate rates of crime and violence. And we know that those things are implications of greater public health issues that those communities are experiencing. A part of addressing that is offering the tools necessary for them to be able to have a better process, right? Because we can't just say stop doing that, that is somebody exactly,
and we're not giving them to them
exactly,
and then we're complaining. I said, how long are we gonna do this little cycle?
Oh, black on black crime needs to end, but we're not offering folks once they get into this situation. Okay, so where do we go from here? Because I just want to fight, and that's what my mama used to do. That's what my daddy used to do. That's what Titi Fifi do.
That's why the gun violence is high, because they were well, actually, I ain't got nothing to talk about. I'm just gonna kill them.
Right.
And
like, these are real
understand.
conversations. Like, mental health is extremely important, but it's not just addressing gaps in mental health and preparedness of intervention. It's also prevention and being proactive about how do we prepare people for tense situations that are a part of life, right? Like, you're going to disagree with people. People are going to make you mad.
And
like,
it's really okay. It's
and
not the
it's
end of the
really
world.
not that deep.
It's not.
Like,
but
it's
I do
really
think
not.
that people are taught that. Not only are they taught that, but their experiences are, once it's reached a certain level, then it doesn't come back.
There's no coming back down.
And
Unless,
we also have never experienced that. If I've never seen my mama come back down from an angry situation, we don't know how to resolve it. Or if my critical thinking skills are not there because we're
It's not like the education system is.
We have a horrible education system. We're in a food desert. I have lead poisoning.
Extreme heat.
I got memory loss. Like, I mean, it's a lot of stuff happening all at once. Lead poisoning has so many dangerous impacts on people that I feel like no one thinks about. Like, if you're having respiratory issues or your cardiovascular system isn't working well and you aren't getting blood to your heart, which helps your whole body, then you aren't able to like process and operate in a
Your
normal
body physiologically is not operating as it is intended to.
And that's the main issue. Like, you got all these things fighting against you, and you don't have the skills. You don't even know how to resolve the conflict.
And even if I did, right? Like, so that's such a big that is something that's so important for us to have conversation about, because I think sometimes that gets lost, like the actual tools, like actually having conversation and educating people about how to resolve conflict, like not assuming that these are skills that, you know, some people go their whole lives, you know, at the drop of a pen being ready to fight, you know, it's folks'
and also
grandma.
Understanding that, like, you don't have to end up agreeing with the person. Like, we can actually not resolve the conflict. We can try to talk it through, it don't get resolved, and be done.
Yes.
That's okay,
and go
too.
our separate ways.
That's okay too.
And you go where you go, and I'm gonna go where I go.
And we're done.
Yeah, that's so incredibly important. Very passionate about that. But I want to make sure that we use all our time. So my next question, or the next topic of discussion, evolution, is in talking about the United States. The U.S. has the highest incarceration rate in the world. Stop. Okay, with a disproportionate number of Black men specifically being in prison. The conditions of prisons in the U.S., which has the highest incarceration rate, are also horrible, like also, some of the worst in the world, which were even more prominent during the COVID-19 pandemic. It got that much worse. So how do factors like poor quality of prison infrastructure and living conditions and the lack of access to healthcare and rehabilitative resources contribute to cycles of recidivism and continued oppression of Black Americans within the criminal justice system? Let's start there.
Yeah. I love this question too, because I'm always talking about recidivism and the way we treat people in jails. I feel like the saying, like they come out worse than they went in, is very true here, because we don't give people rehabilitative services, and so the recidivism rate is going to be high because they didn't learn any skill sets when they were in jail, and this tends to be for some folks, if they're going to prison, this is all they know. Like one of my favorite examples is on Orange is the New Black, when Tasty got out of jail and she didn't know how to function because she was not taught anything. She went to prison, she did some time, and then she got out. They taught her no skills. And when they do that for folks, there's no tools. And when they do that for folks, it makes it harder for them to actually survive outside of that system. And in Tennessee, like, we have a lot of rehabilitative services for women, but not as many for men. We really have none for men for the most part. When I know people who've gotten out of prison, they move them into the transitional facility for women, but I don't see them do that for men. And then we wonder why the recidivism rates are so high for them. And a lot of other places are the same way. They don't offer the same services for them. And I think it's mostly because they don't see them as redeemable. But also, if the recidivism rate is high, then you're coming back and I'm getting more money off of you. So I think it's more so we don't want to invest in that. The rate is going to be high. And a lot of times they only got healthcare services when they were in jail. They only got mental health treatment when they were in jail.
I may not be eating. I may not have a bed. I may go home, without. So to some people, that is a better resource than, because they also, let's not even, that without even mentioning the struggles to seek employment after having been in jail, especially if you were like actually in prison, not just in jail. Having a record in general is a struggle, but having a felony, for example, on your record makes it almost impossible to continue to matriculate into a career, right? Something long term, especially past blue collar, right? Like there is such a stigma in our society around having been in prison, and it goes back to we were speaking earlier about multidisciplinary approaches, right? Because so often we see the title or the record or whatever the case may be, and there are no questions asked. That is the end of the story, right? When and the craziest part be like, some of y'all, if you was caught for the stuff you was doing back in the day,
you'd be messed up too.
Now come on. Like, you
just didn't get caught.
Right? You just didn't get caught. You just didn't get caught, right? You weren't in a heavily surveilled neighborhood, right? We have not experienced the same things right? And so like multidisciplinary approach is important in like providing therapy. Like there is so much that contributes to a lifetime of crime before people reach that point, right? Like there's so much that goes into it. It's not just like, oh, this is the life that I chose for myself. So, I didn't see another path. I didn't know what else to do. I didn't have the mentor that I needed. I didn't have the resource that I needed. My school hasn't had new books since way back when. The local neighborhood community school that I was attending got shut down, and my mama can't drive me to school, and I can't take the bus because the bus systems in our neighborhood are also trash and messed up. Like there are so many different contributing factors that can make it seemingly impossible, especially when you talk about generational, like when their primary caretaker went to jail. When you are raised by somebody or raised in a family of people who have existed in crime or have patterns of crime, and that's what you grew up around. That is the climate of your neighborhood, your block. Like, this is just what we do. I'm trying to get my mama out the hood, and the only way that I could see to get my mama out the hood was to be on the block. Vanessa. You feel me? Like, I had to do what I had to do. Yeah. And so those are the conversations that we have to have as far as like preparing folks in jail with like the soft skills that they need to re-enter the workforce. Also,
and
talking
level
about
setting with them, like being honest, like this is going to be a little rough. Like there's going to be a little rough patch here. I feel like people don't level set with folks either, and like just all right, you're getting out,
and even keeping them up to date. Because, like, that is so oftentimes a conversation, too, of, like, oh, I got out of jail and, like, the world had changed. I was living in a completely different world. Like, it's not just that, oh, I don't have the tools or, oh, I can't get a job. It's that there's a shock.
Shell shocked. Like, you don't even know what
even being in jail or prison for, like, 5 years.
It's a huge change.
The world has changed. Like, the world is a very different place in 2025 than it was in 2020. Post-pandemic, the world changed. Yeah. So you think even people who ended up or landed in jail pre-pandemic, like, it's just crazy shit.
A pandemic happening at first,
and we are still recovering. Like people who were not incarcerated are still recovering from the pandemic. So you can only imagine the added layers, right, of like having been in prison prior to the pandemic, then gone through a pandemic, a traumatizing experience for the entire world, in addition to whatever trauma they already had previously coming into the situation, not knowing if their family was good, not being able to check up on their family, not having the privilege to be able to just call or to go to funerals,
and
or
not
to be
getting
able
health care. Like in Memphis, the largest percentage of people who were dying were in the jail. Over 70% of the COVID deaths at one point were coming from the jail.
Wow.
because they weren't getting health care, they weren't quarantined, they don't have anywhere to put them, so they're all on top of each other. Yep. And our DA is trifling and wouldn't just let the people out who had nonviolent offenses. So you can let folks just die just because they literally cannot physically separate and like quarantine themselves. That's insane.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And so these are there need to be solutions. These are the things that we have to advocate for and be considerate of, especially in communities that are experiencing disproportionate burdens of these impacts on our society. Because again, yes, this is an American issue. Oh, yeah. Like, that's point blank period. The fact that the United States, the land of the free and the home of the brave, has the largest incarceration rate in the world.
It's a cash cow. You know?
Like,
prisons are private now. They making money.
They're not concerned about us, and like that should concern all of us. But for those of us who again are facing the largest burdens in our families and our communities, we have to be intentional about advocating for those who are not able, again, to operate within the power that they do intrinsically have, those whose autonomy have been taken from them. You didn't got me going. I feel hot. I feel you get into conversation now. I'm warm. Okay, but we're preparing to wrap it up. We're coming close to the end of another great episode. I just knew this conversation was going to be great.
And I was excited about it.
I'm so excited that you were able to join us. But as we come close to another episode, we always like to leave our audience with some type of like call to action, advice, like, key factor. And I always say, I hope y'all were listening to everything else. Okay. I hope you heard everything else. But if they didn't, let's say they snoozed, they took a nap, they fell asleep, they zoned out, they got to watching their favorite show. If they locked back in now and they didn't leave with anything else, what do you want to make sure our audience hears today?
I would say get active in your community. I think that community is really the only care that we need. I am a deep believer in community care, and community care can heal a lot of the issues that we're having, from conflict resolution to folks having resources to being able to like get in touch with your city council member. All those things tie in together. So community care.
Community care. Get involved. Speak up. Don't let struggle be your story.
That's right.
Yes, all of those things. So, again, I want to thank you all so much for joining us for Season 5, Episode 4 with me and Amber. You can catch us back here next month. Same place, same time. Bye.